our building's life is over.
But have you ever had any in your own apartment?
I had a waterfall once.
Did you pay extra for that? The waterfall sounds very nice.
It was the
hello,
the
everyone.
flashometer in the bathroom upstairs sort of broke or disconnected while the shareholders were out, and so all of a sudden I started hearing water, and I thought I left the shower on. Then I said I didn't have the shower on. Then I came, and there was like water, quite literally, pouring through the door frame of my bedroom. And it was a sight. But the interesting thing is, after it dries out, the floor looked a little bit of a mess, but you give old wood floors time, and they just kind of settle out, and everything was fine. It was amazing.
I guess back in the old days, they poured water on it instead of using a Swiffer or something.
No, it's just that if you let the wood dry out, it'll sort of even out. But I mean, initially it looks, worked, and you say, oh my God, I have to redo this. But the super said, just calm down and let it dry out. So I know Steve is not going to be with us, but then again, this is not the regular day for land use, so it is conflicting with health and environment, but I'm not sure they're on their regular day as well, but Steve is excused. I know that Omar is supposed to be with us, but says he has a 9 o'clock hard stop, but we should be finished by then.
So Steve isn't even going to be late. We're going to miss him.
We're going to miss him.
Steve, in fact, as Wayne said, his meeting is right now, just like ours is. So, and he probably doesn't want to be in two places at the same time.
Oh, sure he does.
But it scares the earthlings when you do that.
Yes, or the mere mortals.
Also.
You're looking very beautiful, Natalie. You're like you're looking very painting-like. Can't hear you.
This is my temporary cubicle. My real cubicle had a lot of art in it, but then we got socially distanced, so I got kind of thrown into this one.
Well, makes you look very much like the subject of a painting.
So we try here at the Manhattan President's Office.
Suddenly, there's amazing light out there.
There's a very beautiful sunset. Maybe I'll bring my camera to the window.
That's what I just said, Jim. It's like very pinkish.
So,
Oh, yeah.
we have quorum of the committee, and it is 7:07. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. and welcome everyone to the September 2021 meeting of the Land Use Committee, which is not meeting on its regularly scheduled day, which would be the first Wednesday of the month. But September was a challenging month. We wanted to avoid any late Labor Day holidays, but also a number of Jewish holidays, which actually I think are occurring a month earlier than normal, although it's a different calendar. So in October, we'll be back on our normal schedule, which would be the first Wednesday of the month. I'm Wayne Benjamin, and I chair Land Use for Community Board 12. And before we before I have my other committee members introduce themselves, we have a couple of new members on the Land Use Committee. So I'd like to welcome Joel Abreu to the Land Use Committee. You can unmute yourself and say hello.
Good evening, guys. Thank you so much, Benjamin. Again, I'm glad to be here. It's my first time being a part of the community board and my second committee meeting. I look forward to working with you guys. I'm very excited to be here, and yeah.
So you are not only a new committee member, you're a fairly new community board member as well.
Yes, correct. Yes, that's true.
So welcome aboard, and I hope we don't scare you too much. Because you haven't experienced the general meetings yet, have you?
I have not. I hear
Okay.
they're pretty scary though.
Okay, so we'll try not to scare you.
No, it's all right.
And Curtis Young is also now on the Land Use Committee, but he also has like Steve Simon, has a conflicting meeting. But since today is not the regularly scheduled day, both Steve Simon and Curtis Young are excused. So with that, Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya, and Assistant Chair of Land Use. Welcome to the new members, and it's nice to see everybody back after our summer break.
Vivian?
I'm Vivian Ducat. I'm a public member of Land Use.
And years ago, you were actually a community board member and a committee member outright, but you came to your senses, I guess.
That's right. I think
Jim?
I'm Jim Berlin. You might be able to tell I've been here a while, and I have not yet come to my senses as Vivian so wisely did. But I welcome all the new members, and we are very fortunate on our committee to have such an excellent group. And I think you will all be impressed with how well we can all work together. Thank you.
With that, the agenda originally included two presentations in addition to our discussion of the FY23 budget priorities. The presentation by the American Academy of Arts and Letters to establish accessibility and link the buildings, that has been postponed to the October land use meeting. There was some, communication snafus, and so they only, got confirmation at the last minute. But just a little bit about that, and I think, for Joel in particular, because you haven't been part of these conversations, but Tanya maybe as well, because the Audubon Terrace complex is a series of buildings that were built starting, I guess, in the early 1900s. And, even getting to the terrace itself, there are accessibility issues because you have to go down a few steps and up a few steps. And in the buildings in particular, it seems you can't go from one room to the other without going down a few steps, up a few steps. And that's true for the American Academy of Arts and Letters, but also the Hispanic Society. These buildings are all like, 1900 whatever buildings. They're like 100 years old and landmarked. So what the American Academy of Arts and Letters is proposing to do is a renovation that would link their buildings. They have some buildings that are on the south side of the terrace and some that are on the north side. And so they would link them, but they would also create an accessible path throughout, the building so that you would now have ADA compliant. This is something, we've been talking about with them and with the Hispanic Society for quite literally years, but it takes money and time and planning. So this one is finally coming to fruition. So we'll have a more detailed discussion of that in October. And since the buildings are landmarked, any renovation has to be approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and that typically entails a presentation before the community board within which the building sits, so that we can offer, our opinions on that. So we'll be meeting with them, in November. So in October. So the presentation that we are going to have now is with the Department of City Planning on the permanent open restaurants program. And we, throughout 2021, have entertained and discussed a number of, zoning initiatives with city planning is coming out of the mayor's office. I believe this is the last one. And so with that, I think we have Annie White, who the committee members know, but we also have Jose, who is new. I don't think you've met with us before, so maybe the city planning team can introduce themselves. And Omar, how are you? I see you're here.
Good. Sorry, I was running from putting down my son to sleep, and I'm like, Jesus, 12 minutes past 7. Let me get on.
Not a problem. So maybe the city planning team can introduce themselves to us, and then we can go through the presentation.
Yeah. How's everyone? My name is Jose Trucios. I am a planner with the Manhattan office of the Department of City Planning. Before I start, I just wanted to quickly say we have our colleagues from the Department of Transportation as attendees, and they need to be promoted to panelists so they can help us with the presentation. Jackie Lazaro and Kimberly.
Okay, well, Jackie Lazaro and Kimberly. I don't see Kimberly.
Been promoted.
Okay, so you've been promoted. You're going on to the next grade.
Right.
Yeah, and Jackie as well. So whenever they are. Before we start, I just wanted to say a few words. There we go. We had Jackie now. So as you know, Annie, she's the team leader for the Upper Manhattan team. I work mostly in Community Board 10 and 11. I'm going to be helping out with potentially Community Board 12 and 9, given that Ryan Cody's departure from the Department of City Planning, and attending meetings and so on. First, I wanted to thank you all for having us here tonight to discuss yet another citywide text amendment. I know you guys have seen a lot of these, the last 5. And today we will talk about the open restaurant zoning text amendment. This presentation will be divided into 2 parts. The first part will be the overview of the current temporary open restaurants program. And we're gonna go over the lessons learned from the Executive Order 126 and 128, which allow the establishment of the temporary program. And the second part, which the zoning text amendment, which is what we asked for the community board's recommendation on today. We will answer all the questions after our presentation, and those that we cannot answer tonight, we're gonna follow up with the board. And with that, I'm gonna ask Annie White to please share her screen. As I mentioned before, I am joined by Kimberly and Jackie from the Department of Transportation, and they're gonna start with a part of the actual overview of the open restaurants program.
Thank you, Jose, for the introduction, and thank you to the board for having us tonight.
Are you sharing your screen or something?
I believe Annie is sharing her screen.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, I apologize. I actually I am needing to get into my security to allow access, but just one moment. Yep. All right. Are we seeing the PDF? Apologies for the delay.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Yep.
Great.
Perfect. So, as mentioned, today we're going to discuss the Permanent Open Restaurant Program and the text amendment. So, Annie, if you could just please head to the next slide. Okay, so for the next few minutes, I'll be talking us through where things stand from a more programmatic standpoint with the permanent open restaurants, which will continue to give restaurants the option of sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. The program will look to better balance the many needs of the street and sidewalks, keeping both restaurants and other users in mind. And we're going to take what has worked, and we're going to take what has and hasn't worked in the past, both pre-COVID and now during the emergency program, when developing the future guidelines. And I want to make clear that while this presentation will cover both the sidewalk and roadway dining, DOT and city planning are asking the board for their opinion on the specific sidewalk cafe text amendment. Next slide. And as you know, the city had street and sidewalk cafes before COVID, but there were far fewer of them. The majority of the programs were administered by the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. DOT did run one small pilot of public roadway seating, which we called street seats, but there were only about 25 setups, mostly in Manhattan. And our understanding is that the relatively low participation was in large part due to the cost and the process. Next slide. During COVID, New York City suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order, and DOT was directed to create the Open Restaurants Program, allowing restaurants to conduct their business in the public right of way. Since the launch about a year ago, over 11,000 restaurants have participated, which saved about 100,000 jobs. By many accounts, this program has been a lifesaver not just to the restaurant industry, but also to the city that has seen outdoor dining and the incredible vitality it can bring to our sidewalks and streets as a beacon of hope and innovation in a dark time, a sign that our city can imagine a better future. Next slide. Of course, there have been successes and challenges over the past year. We've learned both positive and negative lessons in that time, and those lessons are critical to informing how we proceed with a permanent program. On the positive side, we think that the robust use of the emergency program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-emergency sidewalk cafe program, no geographies were off limits. Any restaurant with ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met the criteria could participate. Second, the program was free and easy to access, unlike the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe program, which required months of multiple reviews by multiple agencies. And third, the element of roadway dining gave brand new options to restaurants, particularly those that might not have had enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a cafe. It is also worth noting a few lessons learned from the emergency program. For example, the speed of the rollout and the fact that the program was built from scratch under emergency circumstances created some confusion. As DOT learned more about operating a program like this, and the program was extended by the mayor into the winter, some of the guidance had to change along the way to keep everyone safe. Second, throughout the program, DOT learned more about the challenges specific to the roadway seating and its interaction with the roadway. For instance, we've heard examples of other agencies such as FDNY and MTA that there were issues with turning radius and safety signs being blocked. Safety is of the utmost importance here and will remain so. So we will continue to work with our agency partners on that. Third, enforcement has been complicated on multiple fronts. On the one hand, you have restaurants who are dealing with a lot and who felt squeezed and over-inspected by too many different people. On the other hand, you have some communities, particularly the mobility impaired, concerned about under enforcement. Next slide. That being said, the program has seen tremendous participation, and in April, the City Council overwhelmingly voted in favor of the bill to make it permanent. This requires changing a number of different laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. Next slide. I'm going to talk a bit more about what we're proposing for the permanent program and then return to the topic of legal changes needed to effectuate it. To start, we anticipate that as in the emergency program, DOT will administer a permanent option for both sidewalk seating and roadway seating with similar rules to current sidewalk cafes, but available citywide. We want to be sensitive to the traveling public, minding sidewalk clear paths and other rules around sound and hours of operation as well. Next slide. When final, specific design guidelines will be very clear and will revolve around these principles that balance the use of sidewalk space by a restaurant, but maximize the experience of openness and activation to the general public. For most of the city, we're proposing requiring an 8-foot clear path or half the sidewalk width, whichever is greater. In some areas with higher foot traffic, the city is proposing 12 feet or half the sidewalk width. And for other special cases where it may still make sense despite a narrow sidewalk, we're looking at a waiver to go down to 6 feet, which would be co-reviewed by the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities. Next slide. Switching gears, we think that the introduction of the roadway option is a tremendous new opportunity for restaurants, especially those who may have narrow sidewalks. The city is working on how this will be set up permanently, but we will have setups in parking lanes except prohibited zones and maintaining public safety, having clear guidance and enforcement on sound, and comply with ADA requirements. In the future, any roadway setups will have to look a lot more like what's on this slide, not the fully enclosed structure that we've seen a lot of. Next slide. The city is proposing that the new program will not operate during colder months, but with some opportunity for a hardship waiver that would allow restaurants to keep their setups in place. For now, all restaurants will be able to keep operating uninterrupted through this upcoming winter season. Next slide. In looking at both moving the legal authority to run the program to DOT and in creating new processes for the roadway setups, the city is looking to streamline the review process as much as possible, while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. Next slide. To make this permanent program a reality, 3 steps are needed to advance. First, the focus for today is the removal of locational prohibitions throughout zoning. It's key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency. We are also working with the City Council, who strongly supports the program, to enact appropriate legislation, which will update the laws governing sidewalk cafes and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern roadway cafes. Next slide. Following zoning and legal changes, we anticipate rulemaking that will formalize many of the program, design and application details, and then give a formal opening up of the application window for a new program. Though we are beginning a process of developing the future program, the current emergency program is expected to be in effect as is for the next 1.5 years or so. The expectation is that restaurants will have ample time to transition into a new process if they choose to, with minimal operational disruption. Changing zoning is the first critical step to making this program permanent. But as you can see on this timeline, there are multiple steps to developing the full program. Each step welcomes public input and review. Next slide. COVID-19 has really changed the way New Yorkers think about how our streets can be used, which has been a silver lining to the pandemic. We welcome feedback and encourage all to visit our website to submit that feedback to us as we develop all the elements of this permanent program. Once again, the roadway portion of this presentation is preliminary, and the primary purpose is in presenting to the board tonight is to gather feedback on DCP's proposed text amendment changes, specifically related to sidewalk cafes. And with that in mind, I'll return it back to DCP to discuss that.
All right. Now onto the zoning text amendment, which, as our DOT colleagues discussed, is one element of facilitating a permanent open residence program. Next slide, please. The proposed text amendment will remove the entirety of Chapter 1, Article 4 of the zoning resolution and related text in special districts and other areas that relate to sidewalk cafes, to fully remove zoning from dictating locations where cafes can be where cafes can operate. This will allow any restaurants to apply to a DOT for a sidewalk cafe if they can meet the required clear path and siting criteria. Next slide. It's important to mention that sidewalk cafes have long been a part of New York City's streetscape, and with them, the laws governing cafes have evolved over the years. Up until COVID-19, zoning conditioned where cafes could operate. Under the zoning resolution, the zoning rules, which are currently suspended, zoning dictates 3 different kinds of cafes and where in the city they can be located. The most common one being the unenclosed cafes, which allows for removable tables, chairs, and fencing with no allowable overhead coverage other than umbrellas or retractable roofs. A small sidewalk cafe is an unenclosed sidewalk cafe containing no more than a single row of tables and chairs adjacent to the street line and can extend no farther than 4.5 feet from the building. And last, an enclosed cafe, which is they're fine extensions of the building into the sidewalk using light building materials. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, zoning held the geographic restrictions of where these cafe sites were allowed to operate. Yellow allow only small cafe sites. Purple are areas where only unenclosed and small cafes are allowed. And green is where all type of cafes were allowed. Important to mention here in this map, you can see a lot of the areas where cafes weren't allowed at all. Even if the sidewalks were wide and conditions otherwise will have them allowed them to operate. Red is areas specifically prohibited from having cafes, and blue is all the residential areas in the city. If you guys are curious and would like to find out more about the allowed areas or prohibited areas where sidewalk cafes could operate, you can visit DCP's zoning and land use map online platform, SOLA, and play around with our map and find out where these rules are applicable. Next slide. As a response to COVID-19 pandemic, New York State economy went on pause in March 2020. This action resulted in a ban of indoor dining that impacted the industry very harshly. We saw employment in the restaurant industry drop by 60% from Q1 to Q2 of 2020, with the majority of those losses in Manhattan. Sadly, the city also lost longtime institutions in the past year as continued restrictions and aversions of indoor dining made it very difficult for dining establishments to operate. In order to provide support for the restaurant industry and the need to move dining outdoors, New York City stood up an open restaurant program that allowed for the emergency use of sidewalks and roadways by restaurants. This was achieved in part by suspending rules that prohibited sidewalk cafes in certain areas. Over 11,000 restaurants are participating in the open restaurants program today. The city saw a huge surge or outdoor dining occurring in the outer boroughs. 10,000 of the restaurants use the sidewalk for the outdoor dining setup. City Hall estimates that over 100,000 jobs were saved in the restaurant industry, could have been lost had the city not allowed them to move the dining outdoors. By many accounts, this open restaurant has been a lifesaver, and the program has been able to provide the twin benefit of both helping small businesses flourish while also making New York City streets and sidewalks some of the best dining options in the world. Next slide. During the emergency program, 2,500 restaurants were permitted in areas that will have been prohibited or limited under the existing zoning. But the proposed text amendment will allow them to operate so long they meet the siting and clear path criteria. It's important to highlight that a lot of these restaurants who are currently operating, those 2,500 restaurants, were self-certified. I know there have been some complaints and some comments about different operations or some structures that do not comply with the current sidewalk structures. But that's part of the temporary emergency program. And then we hope to make that a little bit, make it better as part of the application process. Looking at the map on the right, in red are restaurants in specific areas that were prohibited by zoning. These include commercial meat blocks, certain special districts under the elevated red lines, other name-congested areas, and in blue are the grandfather restaurants in residential areas. It's very important to mention that zoning doesn't allow restaurants in residential areas, but many of these are predated zoning, and so have remained and are able to operate. We estimate there are about 2,900 citywide and 1,000 participating in the open restaurant program. So of the 2,900 current restaurants that are in residential area, 1,000 of them are currently participating in this program. And yellow are cafes in zones that will have been limited by the small typology only of the sidewalk cafe. Next slide. Let's zoom in into your community board 12. Pre-COVID community board 12 had zoning rules that allow all cafes along the major avenues of the district, being Broadway and St. Nicholas Avenue. And there is also a small portion up closer to Inwood that allow unenclosed cafes in that area. But most important, cafes not were allowed in the majority of the district in the residential areas, which is highlighted here in blue. Next slide. Pre-COVID, there were 24 cafes in your district that had the license by the Department of Consumer Worker Protection, DCWP. 22 of these were unenclosed and 2 were enclosed cafes. Next slide, please. Under the Emergency Open Restaurants Program, there are 198 cafes in CB12. 30 of them will have been prohibited under the current zoning. You can see those in red and blue in here. The text amendment will allow these cafes the opportunity to apply in a non-emergency setting, but only if they meet the citing criteria that DOT will soon lay out. It is important to highlight that the increase in the number of sidewalk cafes was the indoor dining closure. Even when restaurants were allowed by zoning to apply for a sidewalk cafe, they might have not done it because either it wasn't necessary or because the program or the application process was hard for them. So highlighting only that 30 of those are the ones that are, the ones that wouldn't be allowed at all because of zoning. So like the increase of over 100 is because of the, the need of the restaurants to actually have the outdoor dining. Here's a picture of Tyrone Public House, which is located in a residential area. Next slide, please. We also have other cleanup actions in the text amendment to include, which are removing definitions and cross-reference to the cafes, removing text that precludes operable windows that service outdoor restaurants, ensuring that no enclosure provisions require a restaurant to be fully indoors as a condition of the zoning district, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure it does not conflict with the operation of the open restaurants program. Next slide. To summarize all, we are at the start of the multi-pronged legislative process. The text is being referred out to you today was referred out to the 59 community boards, 5 board presidents for 90 days, expiring September 27. We expect to come back to the City Planning Commission in early October And we anticipate city council actions to be underway during the same period, continuing the process of updating the Sidewalk Cafe program and fully fleshing out the Roadway Cafe Authority through a DOT rulemaking process. Also underway during the summer and informing part of community boards consultations will be a DOT design review process that city planning and other city and state agencies will be involved with. We have heard a lot of comments in recommendations regarding the Department of Sanitation, the State Liquor Authority. So we are currently having meetings and actively coordinating with those as we develop the design and also the guideline rulemaking process for this permanent open restaurants program. We do not expect the full program to launch until late 2022 or early 2023 at the earliest, which gives us a lot of time for restaurants to transition to the permanent program should they choose to do so, and if they're also allowed by the regulations and rules to apply for the program. With that, the next slide. Sorry. With that, that concludes our presentation, and I mean, we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jose. One of the new land use committee members, Curtis Young, who's not a new community board member, but he's new to land use committee, emailed me because he cannot make this meeting because he has a conflict, but I think he was able to sit in on the presentation that was made to Community Board 10 and wanted me to raise a couple issues. One pertaining to sanitation. There were a lot of complaints that, with the increase in the sidewalk dining, there's both the garbage and the rodents, and how are those issues being addressed? And also, how is noise being addressed, particularly when you have restaurants that may be on the ground floor of buildings that have apartments above. So how is city planning and DOT dealing with those two issues?
I don't know if DOT wants to go first. I just wanted to add a little bit of clarity on this. So while we transition into the permanent open restaurants program, DOT will be the overarching, overseeing application agency for all the sidewalk cafes and roadway program. So they will be the ones who will in charge for enforcing.
Mm-hmm.
And there will also be part, when defining enforcing, I can go into that a little later because I'm sure we're gonna have questions into that. But the first response for enforcing will be NYPD, 311, and then DOT is planning on buffing up a little more of their enforcement unit for actually coming out and reviewing different structures. For sanitation, as I mentioned, we are part of the, we have a coordinating, I don't know if I want to call it a task force, but it's an standing meeting with Department of Sanitation, the fire departments and NYPD as well, to ensure that we are, taking all these recommendations and all these conversations with community board seriously, and also that they will inform part of our decision-making process. As currently it stands, we have scaled back on the sidewalk cleanup in particular areas where they had sidewalk cafes. But we are taking very seriously this the comments in terms of sanitation. I was part of the presentation CB10. CB10 is actually my board, so I share a lot of their concerns. And then we are asking them to also add that as part of their recommendation when they're issuing their vote. I think I might be forgetting your first question. You mentioned sanitation and what else? Sorry.
Noise.
Noise is currently not allowed. So as I mentioned earlier, so a lot of these new restaurants and sidewalk cafes and the ones that are in the roadway program will self-certify. There's been a little not too much information in that part. So what we're asking when we come to the community boards, if you have specific locations where this is happening, to provide us a list to us and DOT so we can come out and do some enforcement and on that part. But amplified noise will not be allowed as part of the, it's not allowed currently and will not be allowed as part of the open restaurants program.
Yeah, I don't know if the question was particularly on amplified noise, but if you have people outside dining, having a good time, depending upon the hour. Once again, just the ambient noise of people can become an issue. So are you saying that it's going to be DOT's responsibility to monitor noise complaints under the Sidewalk Cafe program?
Right. So NYPD will still be the primary agency to respond to restaurants that receive noise complaints or other quality of life issues. Restaurants that are fined for being loud or having amplified noise will have that information sent to DOT, and they could have their sidewalk or roadway cafes license revoked if they're found in violation. So what we're asking if like if it's something that needs to take action immediately to first directly reach out to NYPD, but we're also asking those locations that you guys know that are a little problematic, so DOT can take note of that and take the necessary measures.
Okay, I see a couple of hands, but before I go to that, I sat in on the briefing that city planning gave it back in June on this, and raised a question with Ryan then, and raised it again, because what wasn't covered in this presentation that was covered in the prior briefing is, as part of this initiative for the Sidewalk Cafe, enclosed sidewalk cafes are going to be, prohibited. And my question is, why does that, make sense? And there was some discussion that there have been fewer and fewer applications for cyber cafes, but I say, fine, that's a business decision. And if it doesn't make sense for someone to apply for it, then they won't do it. But why prohibit it? Because quite frankly, you can't enjoy eating al fresco in the winter or in inclement weather, whereas in an enclosed cyber cafe, and I've enjoyed many a snowstorm and a rainstorm in cyber cafe, but so I've never gotten an answer as to why that's kind of snuck in there, that enclosed cyber cafes would be prohibited.
Right. So to that answer, part of it, like the need to move things outdoors. So like that's how what the emergency order focus on, moving outdoor, the indoors to the outdoors. So enclosures will not be allowed either in the sidewalk cafe or the roadway program. Now, there are currently 122 enclosed cafes. They will be grandfathered in and allowed to continue to operate. We are not granting any more, or DOT will not be granting any more licenses for the enclosed cafes. One of the reasons is also that we are not seeing as many applications on this as part of the DCWP application process. Given that, this is part of like a building design, is a little more, we just not seeing these applications. And that's the answer that we got from the Department of Consumer and Worker Protections, and yeah, so like they will continue to be allowed, so they are not going to be eliminated from the city, but we are seeing that with the move to have sidewalk cafes and roadway cafes, will be utilizing as much of this the public space as possible, and moving enclosed cafes. The enclosure is kind of like if we're not allowing sidewalk cafes or the roadway cafes to have enclosures outdoors, having more enclosed cafes kind of contradicting the need of the actual program itself.
But those are two very different things. There's a difference between enclosing, space on the roadway and continuing to allow, when I say traditionally, I mean, it's, buildings that enclose cyber cafes for, a century or more. And once again, at least from the business development perspective, and that may come up in the business development committee as well, it seems that it should be left as an option, and it's a business decision whether someone, a proprietor wants to spend the money to do that, if it makes sense or not. But prohibiting it because you want to move everything outside, because you can't move everything outside. I mean, you're still going to have, interior restaurants, and if it makes sense for a restaurant to have a sidewalk cafe, it seems that should be allowed. And, I raised the question for months, and the answers just don't quite, makes sense to me.
It's duly noted. I think part of coming out to the community boards. I mean, I think CB12 has been the first board that in Manhattan that I heard this. I will have to come back to the community, our central team to see if we have more comments about the enclosed cafes.
Right.
But yeah, definitely noted. I think I understand the point. I understand, where you guys are coming from on this, and definitely I will pass along that question. I did, try to talk to Ryan, and then it was the answer that we got. Unfortunately, in terms of the whole move of moving outdoors, it was the need to have less enclosure. We are adding design and guidelines to ensure that there is proper ventilation. And it seems a little contradicting.
Right.
Enclosed, but I understand. Yeah.
I would just note that maybe other community boards didn't comment on it, but as I mentioned in the briefing, it was kind of snuck in there. And if you didn't catch it, you would miss it. And in this presentation, it wasn't covered at all. So that may be the reason why others haven't commented on it. But I think Tanya had her hand up first, and then Omar.
Yes. Thank you for presenting this information. I will not be voting in favor of this for a number of reasons. One is related to some of the issues that have already been discussed, particularly around the impact that this program has had on our community. Yes, while it has provided a service to restaurants that are, that needed to have an option when things were shut down. What I haven't seen over the last year has been appropriate regulation, and that goes from NYPD to DOT. I personally, some of you may know, I've been working on a task force around noise, and I've reached out to DOT, and I do not get any responses or cooperation. And this is a community-based led, group of people. We have thousands of people in our community concerned about the declining quality of life, part of which is caused by restaurants. We have videos of restaurants blasting, literally with outdoor speakers, blasting music outside, having actual entertainment, singers, bands outside, and there's no regulation. You call NYPD, they tell us their hands are tied because they're told to stand down, and that the community doesn't want heavy-handed enforcement. So they're limited in what they can do. I haven't heard from DOT. I've reached out about other problem areas, and I don't hear back from them at all. And I find it very disrespectful. And it doesn't bode well if they're not willing to talk to the community members that are thousands of community members represented by our group and others that are concerned with this issue. How would I have any faith that if this program is made permanent, that there will be responsiveness? We did have a responsive CO in the 33rd that started to work with us, but then he was moved in the middle of the summer out to the Bronx. And so we're sort of starting over. So I don't mean to be long-winded, but I just really don't have faith that there will be enforcement because I haven't seen it. I have not seen enforcement of any of this. With any of these problems, community members do report this. I can tell you, we have, other communities have, we've tweeted videos, we've done it all. I've personally reached out to DOT, begging to have them meet with us to discuss some of these problem areas. I get nothing. And I reached out to the commissioner and one person who was here tonight. I haven't heard from these people ever. They do not respond to me. And so I don't feel that if this is how we're behaving and we're make this program permanent, what are you going to do different? You're going to be different now? I don't believe so. And I find what's happened so far to be very disrespectful to the concerns of this community. I fully support businesses and want them to survive, but if you're not going to enforce these rules and make sure that our community, the quality of life will not continue to decline as it has been, this is not getting my support at all until that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. And I'm gonna, allow DOT to answer to those specific points that you have brought up. Before I do that, I just wanted to highlight, as you mentioned, like perhaps this is happening, in the past, and it's been happening even before the emergency order was in place. But for some of these restaurants that are, or for what is happening right now, it was the self-certified situation that has kind of caught us a little bit under guard, and then we're preparing to roll out this new rulemaking process, the application process that will perhaps sometimes, and on top of that, the clear path and the steering criteria that might reduce the amount of the existing sidewalk cafes and roadway current setup that exists today. As I mentioned, 1,500. Some of these might not choose to apply for a license. Some might not be able to because of they're not meeting the criteria. If they have too many complaints or so, they might also be not taken up to consideration for applying for a license. So all these things that are happening in coordination that will help us, develop the program in the next 2 years or so. But I don't know if Kimberly or Jackie want to answer to specific, the questions of the enforcement issues that may happen in Community Board 12.
I'm sure I can just reiterate what you were saying basically about this being, enforcement being really challenging during this time. And I know, Tanya, you have reached out, not specifically about open restaurants, but about other noise area issues in the area. And we have had definitely internal conversations about that. And I do believe you'll be hearing from our office shortly about those, but I don't think they've been specific to open restaurants, and noted the challenges of enforcement over the past year have been there for sure.
I'm sorry, can I respond to that? May I respond to that? I'm sorry, Kimberly, but I have reached out to your group, to DOT, for a year now to come to our meetings, but we talked about everything, all of the noise issues, including the ones generating from businesses. That has been something that we have been inviting you all to the table for a long time. All the other agencies showed up in February to our task force meeting. I mean, every single one, and except for DOT. And yes, I did bring you another issue, but that issue, these are all related. And if you're not going to respond to us with that, why would you respond to us with this? It matters what your actions have been. And I don't understand. You're having internal conversations. This is the community that wants to talk to you and have a dialogue about their concerns. That should be an external conversation. And we have offered, begged, pleaded to have that conversation. So no, where is the accountability? Where is where is that respect for the community and the concerns of the community? I don't see it. It's like we will only talk to these people. We will only talk to that. We've been working on this. Community members have been working on this there for a long time. I am on Community Board 12. Okay, and I have been for a number of years, and I have been talking about this. We are not trash that people can just ignore. And I feel that I personally feel that that's how I've been treated from your agency. And I'm not happy about this. And I'm sorry to say that we haven't been bringing this. We have, and we have tried, and there has been zero response. And it's just not okay. I'm sorry. Thank you, Wayne. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. It's yield space. Sorry.
The next hand I remember was Omar.
All right. So I think I'm echoing kind of like the similar sentiments here, and it's around enforcement, right? So I know that the agencies were caught off guard. That's what it sounds like because of the open application process for these. Being that, May, what would get me to vote okay to this is, what is the plan for enforcement? I hear that there's going to be more of it, but what is the specific plan? We're going to ramp up by this date, by that date. We're going to do sweeps of neighborhoods, and this is kind of like the rotation that we're going to do on sweeps. I bring this up because I live not too far away from a section that is very claustrophobic because there are multiple restaurants, there's other businesses, and everyone's leveraging the sidewalk, everyone's leveraging the parking spaces, and then they're leveraging seating right next to the street parking spaces. So the width that pedestrians have to walk past these businesses is so tight and so limited that it's illegal. Like it's blatant. And I can give you the exact street. It's between 177th Street and Broadway and 178th Street and Broadway. If you just walk on the side where you have, it's the left side of the street going north, because the right side of the street doesn't have restaurants. They're all on the left side.
Yeah, I
So
know the location.
yeah, you know the location. So it's extremely tight walking through there. And it's very high traffic on top of that. That's when I think about enforcement, and I walk through there all the time, and I've been walking past there for a year, and I'm like, okay, maybe one day I will see some kind of enforcement that has occurred here, but it hasn't. So that lends me to believe that there aren't sweeps being done in neighborhoods to see whether or not the businesses are abiding by the rules. So that's my question. What is the timeline? What is the anticipated rollout of enforcement? How consistently will the enforcement be? Because I do hear, let's rely on 311, let's rely on those things. But outside of relying on reporting and constantly having to report it to 311 and bombarding 311 with these kind of things, what does the enforcement look like? Like actually going to look like? That's my concern. And another note to the noise issue. Yes, there are plenty of businesses. If you just take a stroll up Broadway, where you see that they've taken speakers and put them into the outside enclosures. So they're playing music in those enclosures outside of the restaurants. So that, again, if there was kind of like any kind of sweep in the neighborhood, you'd come up with 2 or 3 of those just by a walk. And that's why I ask, what does the enforcement look like? Because it doesn't seem like there's any.
Any,
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, any response from city planning or DOT?
Sure, I can say that we, especially with regard to sidewalks earlier on, over the past year, we have not been enforcing that. Our focus has been on roadways and those immediate safety issues in the roadways, since that was something very new to us. And since over the past probably month or 2, or maybe a bit more, we've started working more on the sidewalks as well. So we are ramping up our enforcement. We do have, we are growing our staff for that and putting more resources into that. So it will be increasing.
The next hand I recall was Vivian.
Curiously, I find a lot of restaurants too loud, and the one thing I'll say is that I actually like eating outside because it's not as intense. But the garbage thing is just not only right where I live on 157th, but it's disgusting. I mean, there's a restaurant we like in the Bronx, and then there's just like piles of it, and there's never, I mean, people comment in our neighborhood that it never was like that with all the garbage on the ground. So if you want a sanitary way for people to eat, there has got to be many more pickups as well as more bins. And somehow they have to be separated away from these outside eating spaces.
Yeah, as part of that thing, like that's gonna is being one of the things we hear in the most, and that again is part of the rules and that are being unfortunately still under development. We hope that come back to community boards soon, and as part of that, the development process of this in coordination and with you and DOT and the other city agencies to develop this. So it's no part of just, issuing the rules that are currently on place today and just forwarding putting forward for the next program, but it's also engaging the community, hearing back from them, and see like what can be done. We're hearing a lot of constructive, criticism on this and things like what could be done. Either more pickup days or even having restaurants have more, like cleanup days or something after their days, fines and all sorts of details that are under current discussion as I currently I know. But yeah, so it's noted. Unfortunately, I mean, I wish I could say more about where these are in terms of like what will definitely be in place. I know that we're working hard on this to ensure that that is part of what will be the permanent program.
But it's not actually the restaurants causing it, and that's what I find so strange. It's that they're situated next to buildings that never have pickup, and it's kind of
Right.
feels very unsanitary. I mean, years ago, I got a third bin in front of my building, and then they took it away. And I said, "Why'd you take it away?" They said, "Too much household garbage in there." It's like, well, there's nothing I can do about that. And so we have overflowing bins. So I think that really there has to be a sanitation thing. If a restaurant is outside, that there has to be more collection, or the garbage has to be moved away or something. So it isn't necessarily, it's not the outside restaurant's problem as much as the city's problem and where these places are situated.
Yeah, definitely noted.
Thank you.
Joel?
Hey guys, I happen to really like this idea, and as a new board member and new committee member, and I've been living in Washington Heights all my life, and what I saw during the pandemic was really sad because one of the main things in Washington Heights is the restaurant, the culture, how vibrant it is, and when that got decimated, and then it was kind of sad to see. But this emergency program, allowed restaurants to build back, right? And I didn't know that it was like an emergency plan. I thought it was always going to be permanent, but I just had a few questions in regards to how this permanent process is going to be. I know that some restaurants were already in this process, and I noticed there was a manual in the presentation that you had. My question is this manual available to businesses, new businesses and old businesses, and where can they find them? And is there going to be like a seminar or a training for businesses that already have it and need to make changes, or new businesses that don't have it and are going to put the permanent structures up? Is there seminars or trainings for these businesses to go and execute that?
I don't know if DOT wants to take that question.
I'm sorry, I don't think I followed the question.
Oh, the question is, there was a manual reference during the presentation. Is that manual publicly available? And will there be, informational session? Will there be training session for business owners to understand, what the rules
Right.
are?
I mean, we just have to distinguish between the temporary program and the permanent program. So there's information online currently about the temporary program. We're still developing the permanent program. And so we plan, that's still a long process that we have to go through. There's a lot of details to be worked out, and that will be, done with involvement from the community. And then we also will have, more materials and information available to businesses, certainly. But, just that's all still in development. The permanent program is still in development. The focus of tonight is intended to be on the text amendment.
So I guess my question is, while you guys are developing that program, within that program, is there a section where there will be a seminar or training for these businesses to get training, get proper, teach them how to be within the regulations of these structures? Is there within that program, within that planning?
I'm not sure that that's been discussed yet. It might have been outside of what I'm aware of, but that's certainly something we can take back as a suggestion or recommendation to reach out to businesses that way.
I think that's essential. I mean, as a business owner, that's going to be do or die, something that I'm gonna need to know how to do. Definitely work that into the program.
Thanks, we appreciate that suggestion or recommendation.
Hi, Natalie, I see you have your hand up as well.
Hi, thank you, Wayne. Thank you, folks, for the presentation. I did want some clarity on how the temporary thing continues to operate. If there is an agency that goes and actually verifies that a space is suitable, or is it still self-reported as it was for roadbed cafes at the beginning of the emergency? And I will simply give you the context that this is just my Clark Kent day job. And, in real life, I am often, have the honor of pushing my young niece's wheelchair around. So I'm hyper aware of what the impact of these on being able to get across a sidewalk with her. As the chaperones used to say at our dances, you got to leave some room for the Holy Spirit. When you have, this whole 50% of the sidewalk, if part of that 50% is taken up by a tree bed, if part of that root of that tree is bumping up a corner of the first piece of concrete outside of the tree bed, and if in addition to that, that structure is on an incline, that complicates things beyond a very simple measurement of 50% of the sidewalk. That creates a space in which I could not get her wheelchair, and that's a child-size wheelchair. So, and this happens a lot. We take pictures of it as a family. And so what is that process? Are people who are found to have created a situation because they built it according to the specs they were given and they were quite literal about it, are they going to have to dismantle those? Are they going to then rebuild things that align with that permanent? So please speak to that a little bit.
Sure, I can say that for now, the review process is the same as it was, which is that the temporary program is self-certification. And specifically, as I mentioned before, for enforcement, I acknowledge that, for the first year of this program, we were not actively enforcing the sidewalk to the same degree that we were the roadway. That is something that we are now amping up, and we are now issuing fines. We are now having, requiring, working with restaurants to adjust their setups and, removing when we need to. So those are things that are happening more now than they have been. And I encourage you, if you have specific locations, to reach out to us now that we are able to enforce more.
And just to add a little bit in terms of the instructions, the expectation is that, the guard, tree pegs, street furniture, and other infrastructure in the sidewalk will remain key elements of which restaurants, need to measure adequate clearance. So, the clear path has to be measured for them from those spaces to ensure that they comply with the clear path criteria in order to certify for or to apply for the application. There will also be, year review by these of these licenses to ensure that they are complying with these processes. And if you question about like if they had to dismantle structures that are currently in place, that will be the case if they're not complying with essentially the clear path, or they're not they had too many violations. They will have to remove these things. There's also currently, if the structure is abandoned for more than 30 days, they had to also be cleared out of the street or the sidewalk, depending where they're located.
Well, who is actually monitoring to see if a structure is abandoned?
That would be DOT, but as we, as DOTs know, every single place if there are locations that you guys know specifically that have been abandoned for more days, DOT will have to go, notify the specific business, and then, take it from there and see if the 30 days have passed, and then come back and either find the establishment or, whoever is in charge of that license application to ensure the removal of the structures takes place.
Are there other questions or comments from the Land Use Committee? Vivian, I see your hand again.
I was just gonna say, is there a way to add this kind of monitoring to the 311 app, which I use to report other sorts of things? I don't know, because you can use it to take a picture and then at least it goes into the system, assuming that you get information on the other side.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Let me just turn my volume up. What was?
Could this type of monitoring be added to the 311 app?
I believe that will be the case, you know, but like what we're saying right now at the moment is like all of these new structures that have been in place have like taken us by surprise. So when we're coming out to community boards to speak about this program is that we asking them to give us a list of where these problematic establishments or problematic structures that are being abandoned are located, so we can directly share this with DOT to ensure that, you know, proper enforcement is taking place.
Right. Actually, I see a hand from Catherine O'Sullivan, and I've adjusted it so she can talk. But you've said something a couple times that I want to follow up on. And I guess the question is, there've been sort of a flurry of zoning text amendments starting late last year, early this year. And with this one in particular, it seems somewhat rushed. I mean, there are all these references to being caught by surprise, have to, you know, look at what makes sense vis-a-vis a permanent program, you know, look at enforcement, look at rules. So why is this zoning resolution text amendment being pushed now, as opposed to doing some more homework and coming back with something that's a little more baked?
Right. That's a very good point. And so, as you know, like this was introduced prior to the governor extending the executive order that allowed these restaurants to continue to operate for 2022. So we were operating under excruciating timeline for that. We were there was a lot of pressure. Like there were a lot of businesses were going to be, or a lot of restaurants were going to be left up in the air. We're not able to operate outdoors, or be like over 10,000 restaurants, changing their business model to outdoor setting, and we like zoning usually for this type of application sometimes can take 1.5 years to actually take in place. It's a very long process, so we wanted to implement this in the future. But now that we are deep in the process, now that the extension has been granted, we have heard the same comment that you're making in terms of like the process being a little bit backwards as an establishment. I mean, we're very aware of that, but we also want to make sure that we are continuing to move the application as it goes, but also making sure that the communication protocol between the community boards and DCP, DOT, and the other city agencies that will be part of the open restaurants program is established now, so we can continue to coordinate in the future and come back to community boards to develop the design process, the application criteria, and all of that issue. But definitely not, to be completely honest with you, that was the answer. Like, we weren't expecting the executive order to come when it did. So we were operating under a very excruciating timeline before to make sure that we were able to like help these 10,000 businesses plus that were going to be left out, not be able to operate in the outdoor dining.
Catherine?
Yes. Hello, everybody. And
hello.
Thank you for your service to the community board. First off, I want to say that I don't think there's anyone, I certainly don't know anyone, that would quibble with throwing the rules aside and allowing the restaurants do whatever they needed to try to survive. But this is a completely different issue. It's actually trying to make permanent a giveaway of our city streets, not DOTs, not DCPs, but New York City people's streets to the liquor industry. And I'm here to speak on behalf of Moving Forward Unidos. We are a member of QUP, which is a coalition for equitable urban policy. And first of all, it's like, yes, the dirt has been referred to, the illegality of the structures has been referred to, the noise has been referred to, privileging the hospitality industry is crazy. You know, it's just, what about all the small retailers that could do with a bit of street space? You know, liquor isn't the only thing that we have in New York, although sometimes one would wonder. As I say, you've already heard about the noise, the rodents. Let's see, the 5-year transportation plan to improve the safety, accessibility, and quality of city streets for all New Yorkers. You know, maybe that ought to be implemented before we go and change a zoning law. This zoning law also, like all the work that was done by the community boards on licensing committees to regulate the liquor outlets and restaurants, wine licenses, and the outdoor cafes is being thrown out the window. It's all that work when they vetted the people to make sure that they're good businesses and that they are adding an amenity to the community is thrown away with this. It's not recommended. I hope the land use committee will recommend to the full board that they reject this. And I would recommend the Manhattan Community Board 4 has an excellent resolution to object to DCP's proposal. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. So just a couple of things to clarify in there. So, you know, no all open restaurants or restaurants who operate in the Sidewalk Cafe or the Roadway program have state liquor licenses. That will still have to come back to the community board for approval. So it's another set of review for the community boards to approve that. In addition to that, the expectation as it stands right now is that Sidewalk Cafe approval process, as it's been before, will remain, meaning they will come back, they will have to come to the community board, and the community board has a say in, you know, a vote on this, and a recommendation that has previously been part of. I know DOT, and Kimberly can add to this, is contemplating having something similar for the roadway program. There are a little more details to finalizing that process, because you know some things of the roadway program is that might be seasonal. So you grant a license in that way. It's a little more complicated. But for the Sidewalk Cafe, the full expectation is that the community board will still have a say on how and where they operate and where they can locate. And I think that gives the community board still a say to ensure that if a particular street needs more pickup, or is there is already a busy street, perhaps to ask the particular business to ensure that there's a cleanup options. I've been part of a lot of conversations with granting these licenses, not just in sidewalk cafes, but more or less on pubs. That will ensure like the community board will ask them like, what are your hours of operation? What are your measures for noise and complaints? So that will still be in place, and that will still be part of the community board purview.
So then why do we need the zoning change? It's sort of a rhetorical question, but also enforcement is a huge problem up here. 10 years of trying to get enforcement.
It sounds like the zoning change is required so that responsibility no longer falls to city planning. It goes to DOT. Is that basically it?
Just a quick clarification that so DCP had pretty much no saying on where the applications process went. So it was DCWP priorly. What zoning did, or what DCP did before, was say, you cannot have a sidewalk cafe in this particular street, or you cannot have, essentially that. So geographic locations, it was kind of like the gatekeeper saying like, you cannot have it here, even if conditions allow them. So as I mentioned earlier, like there were so many, actions that the city planning department has taken over the years, there were like some, they wouldn't allow in special districts, but they wouldn't allow in zone, in trying to reactivate commercial corridors. Like in 116th Street, they allow small like sidewalk cafes, but in 125th they wouldn't allow, or in Dumbo they wouldn't allow. So it wasn't, an overarching criteria that we had. So like by removing zoning, we are putting more into the actual siting and clear path criteria that we believe it makes more sense for an for a sidewalk cafe to operate, rather than dictating and perhaps assuming that all districts are the same on this.
Yeah, well, DOT hasn't shown themselves to be very effective with enforcement, so I would like to see them enforce the laws and the traffic regulations, etc., first before they would be given such a responsibility. And also geographic locations, they're usually, the limitations are there for a reason. They can be tweaked, but they
Yeah.
should be left.
I see Jim
Thank you.
Berlin's hand.
To add to that, I think the point is that the geographic limitations right now are very specific, and so it prevents this from happening in neighborhoods across the city. There's only really very few places where it can happen. So the idea is to open it up to make it possible in more locations. There are a lot of neighborhoods that currently cannot have sidewalk cafes at all, and so this is intended to allow that to become possible with the zoning. And then, of course, over time with the development of the permanent program, we would work through all of the details after that.
Okay, Jim?
Thank you. I've been sitting here listening to my colleagues, and I want to back up everything they're saying. On one hand, you're talking about the future where there will be enforcement, or there'll be clarity, so there'll be enforcement. I don't know. The reality is we have to go by what we see. And the other piece of it is the vast majority of community board members live in apartment buildings. And we feel we have an absolute right to sleep at night in peace and not see rats running around. And to be more specific, it doesn't matter what happens if we don't have a good quality of life. That's the key. We have to feel safe. It has to be quiet and all these other good things. So again, I thank my colleagues for making the points they did, and I totally agree with them. Now, what our strategy should be, do we say we don't want to approve this? That's a possibility. We could put provisos in our resolution demanding not only enforcement being a part of this plan that we're working on and the changes that are being worked on, but as an instrument of good faith, that this enforcement starts sooner rather than later. And let me just mention something. I personally, just based upon my observations, have very good feelings that our incoming mayor, Mr. Adams, understands what we, this community board, and probably community boards around the city are talking about. And in fact, when I hear we're going to open this up everywhere, God forbid, you mean people in places that are now quiet won't be able to sleep at night either? That's not, that doesn't help matters, not for we residents. So I think what we, the community board, and probably other community boards as well, are talking about, that we live here, we need our peace and quiet. These are our homes, and you can't do whatever the hell you want on the street in front of our homes, period. So that may have sounded a little strong, but I think, that is our function, for us to speak for the majority of our community that wants to sleep at night and is entitled to that. Thank you.
Natalie, is that a new hand or an old hand?
Oh, Wayne, all my hands are old hands at this point. I would just, I know that Joelle made a point about training and information available to the business owners. And I don't remember in the slide that listed the different agencies kind of purviews and responsibilities if you're collaborating with the small business services, because they could be useful for something like that. And I will just say that, Jim saying we live in apartment buildings without naming names, because I'm not here to promote any particular business. I happen to live above the place that is the model of what this should look like. So if at some point you guys want to talk to me offline and come visit them, and think about ways that kind of good business practice can be incentivized and rewarded, happy to do that.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, as a former SBS employee, yes, we are part of, having conversations. This is a cross-agency effort, by all means, for sure. And then, as you mentioned, they are like good actors, but they're also bad actors in this place. And then the effort of making this a permanent program is to ensure that everybody's following the guidelines. We try to sometimes have people from the restaurant associations come and speak on behalf of what they're doing and how this has been so helpful. But it's good to hear also from community board members who see the value that this program can bring to the streets, while also noting that there are things that we need to work on and finalize to ensure that we're all in agreement.
Right.
Thank you, Wayne.
It's pushing 8:30, and we do have at least one other agenda item, and I know that Omar needs to leave us at 9, and actually I have to eat dinner as well. So the timeline for this is, and I mentioned this back in June, so the deadline for comments is the 27th of this month. Our general meeting is not until the 28th, so this will need to go to our executive committee, and so I'm kind of mentioning this for the committee members, as well. So the executive committee will have to review and adopt whatever the land use committee passes this evening. And then the full board, literally the day after, could ratify it. And I'd asked whether there was some ability to just extend the date until, the end of the month. I'd say, well, no, we can't do that. So I guess the question is, from the perspective of the committee, what is the resolution that someone would like to forward? It sounds like, one of the things, as Jim, said, we could simply say, no. I don't know if it would make sense at this juncture or any juncture to say, we like it, but here are the caveats, because we've learned in the past, in many cases, the first part of it is heard, the I like it part, and the caveats are sort of missed. So what I'm hearing from all of the comments made is, while there is an understanding of the intent of the proposal, at this juncture, it needs more work in particular areas before, we could consider supporting it. And what do the committee members think about, in terms of framing a resolution? Speak, Vivian. You're muted.
I just unmuted. I think there also needs to be, there may not be money in the government, but there needs to be much more. I think it needs to be staffed further so that there really are enforcers, and you can't, with the current staff, I think, run them in ways that we've been talking about.
Yeah, but that goes to, while we understand the intent, it needs to be further developed before we can actually think about supporting it. And we can. We're talking about, noise and garbage and enforcement and accessibility. We can list the things we've talked about that need to be talked about, further.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If you're looking for things to include.
Yeah, well, actually, I was looking for the framing of the overall resolution, because we are very good at fleshing it out. I see Tanya and Jim.
Yes, I do like that approach of this needing more work, and I think that is the best way to frame it. That this is not, that there are too many concerns coming out of the committee, including all the things you just listed, for us to comfortably support at this time. I think we can ask for specific things, like these are the things that we want to have DOT be at the table to discuss and answer, in a way that will make us more comfortable. We could be very specific about those things. We talked about enforcement. What is that going to look like? I would like some accountability in terms of just what hasn't happened in the past. That doesn't make me feel confident that the opinions of the community will be respected, and that the voices of the community will be respected. Because again, I hate to, but when people don't respond to your emails and just straight up ignore you, that is unprofessional, it's rude, and it's disrespectful. And I represent this community not only as a board member, but also with this other initiative. So I think we could just be very specific about what it is that we're asking them to do. Are we asking them to come up with the plan? Like Omar said, he wants to see a plan. What is the plan? What will it look like? That could be one of the asks. How will their outreach to the community be? How is that going to be different than what has happened in the past? That's just I don't know if that's even maybe helpful. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, Wayne, but that's just, I think, as specific as we can be about what it is that we want to see from them as a guide, and say, this is what we want to see. And if these things are done, we could perhaps reconvene and discuss and see if our opinion, our vote will change.
Right. Jim?
I agree with both your approach, Wayne, and also the points that Tanya makes. We have to make it clear to the world and the people involved that there are these very clear aspects of what we see around us and what we see might be the future that we don't like or need clarification. But I think the way you phrased it, that we're just not ready to come on board with this yet because we don't know enough about it. And essentially what we do know about it, including what we see with our own eyes, even though that's not the same thing, but basically people will assume that the status quo persists, which means that despite all the verbiage being thrown around tonight, my neighbors probably don't think there will be any improvement, assuming these regulations go into effect, because the same forces that are ignoring us now, and I think Tanya is quite correct, that we, who are the closest thing to speaking for the community that we have in this city, we are not to be ignored. And when we are ignored, this tells us that, why should we listen to what the city is telling us? Because, well, actually, they're not telling us anything because they're not talking to us. So I agree with your approach that we're not ready, or even more specifically, we're not ready because what we heard, described to us is not ready for us to approve it. And then, as Tanya pointed out, we come up with a litany of what we don't like or what they need to work on. Thank you.
Okay. So would someone like to move that?
I move that.
Would someone
And
like
I second it.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is vote on the resolution, and for Joel, for your reference, the committee votes first, then if there are other board members present, which they are not, they would vote second. And then any members of the public who are present, if they wish to vote, they can do so. The vote are either in favor, opposed, or abstaining. There is a fourth possibility, which is not voting, but that's not voting due to conflict if the member would, benefit in some way from the particular action. But so typically we're looking at in favor, opposed, or abstaining. So taking a vote now, and I guess the committee members, you can raise your hand so I can see that. Those in favor? I don't know what you're doing, Vivian. One. Opposed? Abstaining? What do you, Vivian, your hand came up when? Unmute yourself and speak, please. Vivian, you're muted. You're still muted.
How about now?
I can hear you.
Right, I'm opposed.
Okay. And Omar, your hand came up, but I don't know exactly when it came up. So were you in favor, opposed, or abstaining?
Opposed.
I'm sorry, Wayne, are we saying we're opposed to what the resolution as you have presented it?
Well, yeah, that's the question. So the resolution is, just to reiterate it, is that while we understand and appreciate the intent, more work is needed to develop and detail a plan before we can consider supporting it. So that's the resolution we're voting on.
That's actually something I support. Sorry, Wayne.
Then I'm in favor also.
Okay.
Right. And let me just clarify as a parliamentarian, if enough people are opposed, we just wouldn't come up with a resolution at all. And I don't believe that was anyone's intent.
Right. So from,
our resolution is that in effect essentially opposes this because we're not happy yet.
right. So basically,
Thank you.
From what I take it, all land use committee members voted in favor of the resolution, saying that, while we appreciate the intent, it needs more work. There are no other board members. Are there any members of the public? I see 2 attendees. If you would like to vote, you can use your raise hand signal. Those in favor of the reso? I see 1 hand. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, thank you. Before my colleagues at City Planning go, the next item on our agenda was a discussion of our FY23 budget priorities. And in looking at the budget priorities from last year, land use only had 2, 1 capital and 1 expense. And with regard to expense priorities, our ask was to dedicate additional planning staff to work with CB12 and local residents to formulate and implement a community-based neighborhood preservation plan for Washington Heights and Inwood, exclusive of any work undertaken in connection with EDC's recent, at that time, Inwood rezoning plan. And the response from, I guess, the mayor's office was, please contact DCP's borough office to discuss this request. So, we've talked for a number of years about wanting to move forward with a refreshed neighborhood planning strategy. When EDC undertook the Inwood rezoning, it was a little disappointing because it really did not include or follow any of the tenets that were outlined in the land use and neighborhood planning study that we undertook with City College and completed circa 2007. So what the mayor's office is saying with regard to this request, we should speak to city planning. So realistically, to whom should we address this so that we can get staff dedicated to work with us on a plan that reflects community priorities?
Sure. Yeah, I can try to weigh in. I do think that to get additional staff, I suppose it would still be a budget request for the department. And I will say, I'm aware of this request. I think I remember speaking about it, if it was last year or 2019, perhaps. But I'll just say that, of course, budget constraints for additional staff is going to be very challenging at this time. We're, extremely threadbare, as you can imagine, at the agency. I think it would be also it could be framed as a priority to engage the staff in this effort. I think our response in the past has been that we recently, went through the Inwood process, and we understand that there were priorities of the community plan that weren't implemented. The administration had their specific priorities of the projects that they were going to pick up in the last 2 years of the administration, this slew of citywides being one of them. So, it's something we can continue to discuss as we move in into the next administration, given it'll, where the priorities are for zoning and land use and growth and preservation is still to be determined. But I think, city planning staff as is, myself, and then whoever is fills in for Ryan's role eventually, if we're able to hire, would be the point people to have those conversations.
Yeah, well, I mean, dedicating additional staff doesn't necessarily mean hiring more people.
Right.
But you have to realize that going back to when CB9's 197A plan turned into an actual rezoning, so that's several years ago, because Edwin Marshall was still working with us at the time. We were advised by city planning that they realized that we've been on the back burner for a while, and it was now time for them to, start working with CB12. We were asked to identify the area that, we wanted city planning to concentrate on. We passed a resolution identifying that area, and that is the last we've heard of this. And that has to be 10 years ago. So, and I would suspect the committee would continue to say that this expense budget priority would be an expense budget priority for FY23. But the question is, how do we get, attention, or how do we get CB12 planning issues prioritized? CB9, it seemed they moved forward because Scott Stringer was the borough president, and he grabbed the bull by the horns and made it happen. But the EDC initiative really did not focus on what we were talking about, and to some extent, it really didn't focus on what Councilman Rodriguez was focusing on either, because he had a much stronger focus on economic development, which I don't think that rezoning really does. So, what do we need to do to get city planning to focus on, working with CB12 on planning initiatives that focus on what we're talking about?
Well, I think we are always willing to have the conversation, but it's a matter of whether the priorities of our planning initiatives are also in line with the community's plan. And if you're referencing with the CB9, the Morningside Heights Community Coalition's proposal, we've been in a long conversation with them and came to the conclusion that that was going to be a proposal that they're putting forward themselves with city council.
No,
because
the rezoning that was passed years ago.
Okay.
CB9 put forward a very well-received 197A plan, but as we all know, 197A plans do not have the force of law. Their recommendation. So Scott Stringer was Manhattan Borough President at the time, and he initiated, to my knowledge, a rezoning that basically took the principles of that 197A plan and implemented. So the zoning that's in place now for West Harlem is a function of that. And when that was passed, literally the next day, we had a CB12 land use committee meeting, and we were told that, we're next in line, and there was a realization that we've been backburnered for a while, but nothing has really happened from that. So is this a conversation that we need to have, with the chair? Is this a conversation that the borough president needs to have, with the chair? Because, the same way that Tanya's talking about, community board members and community residents being ignored, the community board, in terms of its planning priorities, has been ignored in things like, affordable housing and preservation, and, focus on, diversifying the economic base. These are not unreasonable planning goals. It's just, no one is looking at a plan that is building upon what we are setting forth.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. I think if we want to, it's been a while. It's certainly been a while since I've discussed this with you. If we could just, say, let's have a meeting that's outside of maybe a land use committee where I have a broader staff of like our policy people at city planning, and you're presenting, again, I know I'm familiar with the plan, but seeing if there's things that need to be updated for the year 2021, and actually bringing a proposal to the table that we can respond to, and we can get a more in-depth conversation about the specifics of what you would be looking for as far as a larger community plan or a neighborhood plan. That'd be something I'd be happy to contribute. You know, I bring up what was going on in Morningside Heights, if anyone's familiar with that, because that was definitely a situation in which there was a smaller neighborhood coalition that really had, you know, a plan that they had devised, and there was a lot of back and forth between the department and the community coalition, and it ended up being the case where they put forward the plan by themselves. So it's just to say that there's like a lot of different paths that a neighborhood plan could take, but I'm certainly willing to like set up a meeting to discuss a plan in more depth.
Well, we can certainly schedule a land use committee meeting that is, you know, that has a single agenda item, and it's just to, you know, review that. We've had actually some interesting conversations with the Bond Center, where you may be familiar with the planning site that they created for, you know, CB9, so that instead of it being, you know, a paper plan on the shelf, it's an interactive, you know, web-based planning tool. And, you know, we're talking about doing the same thing for CB12. And their focus is, once again, what are our priorities? So that might be a very good conversation with both city planning and the Bond Center to talk about, you know, the current plan, or the plan that we finished at this juncture more than a decade ago, had certain priorities. What are the priorities now in 2021? And, you know, where can city planning help to advance things? And where can the Bond Center help to advance things? And we're more than happy to arrange that.
Okay.
For the committee members, as I mentioned, you know, we had last time the expense item, which is what we were just talking about, is, you know, having city planning dedicate, you know, staff to working with us, not necessarily hire staff, but dedicate staff to work on a community-based plan. And the capital was to allocate funds to support a planning and development initiative for, you know, vacant city-owned land and buildings to develop more affordable housing. This is focused at HPD, and the response from, I guess, from the mayor's office is that the agency will accommodate this within existing resources. So once again, I would think that we would want to continue to advance this as a capital priority, but also want to, and actually this will be an opportunity next month, because we're going to have an update from the task force working on the inward rezoning, which would include HPD. Say, if their response is they're going to accommodate this within existing programs, what exactly are they doing that responds to this capital budget request? But your thoughts on the one capital and one expense, are these things that we want to advance for FY23? Committee members?
I think we should continue to advance them.
Does any committee member disagree with that? Okay, so I will summarize in the minutes that, you know, we continue to support these, and that we will engage with city planning to discuss it, and we will engage with HPD to see how in fact they are accommodating this within their existing resources, and what isn't being accommodated and what they can do to include that moving forward. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I second.
It is 8:51. We are adjourned. See, Omar, we let you go in time.
Thanks a lot, Wayne. It's super appreciated.
Okay. Take care, all.
Thank
Have a
you,
good
Wayne.
night.
Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting you. Hope to see you guys soon. Take care.
We look forward to it. Take care.
Good night, everybody. Thank
Good night.
you. Thank you, Wayne.
Right.
Bye.